Welcome to the Sports Sesh podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Shatwell, and my co-host is James Evans. We've got yet another guest on today, James. We're joined by Alex Pattle. Cheers for joining us, Alex.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Thank you for coming on. It's first things first, really. Obviously, you write with The Independent. What sort of sports do you cover for those who don't know?
Yeah, so it's predominantly football. That's certainly where the focus lies. With most British publications, obviously The Independent included. I'm big on tennis and MMA as well. MMA I suppose is a bit of a niche for me in terms of the desk at The Independent. No one else. While there are some guys who are into boxing, no one specifically kind of into MMA. But yeah, it's mainly UFC stuff. Day to day you have to cover a bit of everything, to be honest, whatever gets thrown at you. But those are certainly my kind of preferred sports.
If you don't mind me asking, how did you start writing for The Independent?
Yeah, so I always liked writing growing up. So I suppose journalism had always been at the back of my mind. But I actually did languages at uni. I did German with Italian. So that was at Warwick, kind of 3 years with my third year being in Germany and Austria, and then a fourth year when I came back to Warwick. And then I started thinking about finally kind of getting into journalism. And I suppose I was at that point where I kind of had to, it was a bit daunting, but I felt like I had to make a decision as to what career I was going to go after. As I said, journalism had always been an option. I felt I'd written for my uni newspaper, started off doing music stuff because I'm a big music fan, and then kind of transitioned to sport because I'm obviously a big sports fan as well, and felt like day to day there's a bit more to cover in terms of writing about sport compared to music. So I looked into masters. I did a masters at City Uni of London, a newspaper journalism masters specifically, and that was really useful for me because beyond writing for my uni papers and keeping blogs where I could write whatever I wanted, I really didn't have much news writing ability and stuff like that. I had never really interviewed anyone. So I learned some good skills there and just kind of just did my best to kind of arrange as much work experience as possible, kind of being polite but persistent. So I started, did some work experience, and then ESPN UK, I got freelance shifts there at the start of last year. Did that for just over a year, and halfway through that time, my work experience with The Independent became freelance shifts as well, up until March, right before the pandemic, when I went full time at The Independent. So that's kind of my journalism journey to The Independent in a nutshell.
With The Independent, obviously, it started out as a broadsheet back in the day, and then 2003, I believe, it changed to a tabloid. Have you had to adapt and change your writing style based on writing for The Independent at all?
No, I wouldn't say I've had to change my writing style. I mean, it's still, I think there are definitely differences between, say, ESPN and The Independent. I just use that as an example because those are the two publications where I've had the most experience and written the most. I think with The Independent, I mean, it's all online now, but we still certainly, I think one thing The Independent does really well is the kind of long form stuff. I think on the sports desk as well. So for us, it's kind of, you have your news bites, you have your quick hits, but that kind of sets us up to do, it kind of gives us a platform to and time to also do the more kind of longer form pieces, the more maybe opinionated stuff. But in terms of the actual news writing, I don't think I've had to change anything. And as for my own style, when it comes to writing longer stuff, I'm still very young in journalism, or new to journalism. So I suppose I'm still learning anyway. I'd like to think I'm a better writer than I was a year ago. I'd like to think next year I'll be a better writer than I am now. And certainly, I've learned to be a bit more concise when writing. When I started off and I was blogging, I was probably a bit too self-indulgent.
Out of the sports that you cover yourself, do you have a preference of which one to cover?
I probably would be MMA, and I'm not gonna speak as if I'm the biggest MMA fan in the world. I got into MMA, and you'll have to bear with me because I appreciate this is, an excruciating kind of thing to say, but I did get into MMA through Conor McGregor, not as a fan, through wanting to see Aldo take his head off, to be honest, because I just started to hear about Conor McGregor and yeah, it was before that fight was rescheduled for December 2015, and I was going back and watching highlights of the Aldo Mendes fights, McGregor versus Mendes, and yeah, I just I don't know, I'd liked boxing, but I don't know, it was something that didn't quite satiate in me, and I think MMA for whatever reason did. So I've only been following for 5 years, and even then it's been a gradual, it's only been the last maybe year and a half that I'll watch near enough every UFC event. And then when I was at ESPN UK, I covered some Bellator bits, and I'm now starting to follow Cage Warriors a bit more on one. But much like my journalism career, really, I'm still learning. But for whatever reason, yeah, MMA has really gripped me, and like that would probably be. It's the one I enjoy. It's the one I enjoy covering the most. And like, this month, there's been so much Premier League football on, and I love that. I love getting to write about Premier League football and getting to watch games as part of my job. But there have been a couple of times where, like, say, I think it was the day before yesterday, I was invited to fighter calls with Whittaker and Till, and I couldn't jump on because there were Premier League bits to cover. And again, I'm not going to complain because I'm very fortunate to be in that position. But at the same time, it's at that point where UFC MMA stuff isn't prioritized quite as much. But I'd love to build the independence coverage to a point where it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Have you got a prediction for this weekend's card for the main event?
I'll tell you what, you guys go first, and then I'll weigh in because I do have some thoughts, but I'd love to hear yours.
Well, for me, my heart goes for Till, but my head's going for Whittaker.
Okay.
Yeah, literally same with me. I think it depends what mental state Whittaker's at. I mean, obviously, he had to take some time off. He had to pull out of the Gaston fight at 234, and he's had his personal issues over the last year or so. And if we see the right frame of mind with Whittaker, matchup wise, I think he can compete with Till in every sort of aspect. And I think recently during this week he said, I may even take Till down to the ground and just hold it for 25 minutes. And you've seen Till with Woodley struggled on the floor. Yeah. So I'm the same with Mason. Obviously Till's a Brit. He's obviously England's finest. I'd love for him to win, but my head is going for Whittaker. What about you, mate?
It's really funny because I'm almost the opposite. Like, I'm going to be frank. I as a journalist, obviously try to stay neutral, which sounds like I'm about to say, however, I'm rooting for Till. But I have to say, Whittaker is my favourite fighter. I love the way he fights. I really respect the way he carries himself. You see all these memes about how men cried when he lost to Adesanya, and I was there covering it for work, like holding back tears the way he went down. But no, so I suppose for me, it's like, I think Whittaker is a better rounded martial artist. Obviously, huge respect for Till, but it's one of those where I suppose my head should say Whittaker wins, and I can definitely see more ways for him to win. But there's that thing in my gut, a bit like you touched on, James, about where is Whittaker at, and I can picture him. I can picture him getting knocked out. I think I rewatched Till vs Gastelum this week. And it was a better. I thought at the time it was a good performance by Till. Looking back, it was a better performance than I actually even realised at the time. So yeah, I think probably Whittaker is the safe bet. But I have this weird thing of where I tend to actually pick against my favourite fighters more often than not. I'm a bit of a pessimist like that. So I'm gonna. Not with a lot of conviction, but I'm gonna go with Till. But I'll be happy whoever wins, and it should be a good fight. Yeah, interested to see if Whittaker takes him down. I think it would probably be smart, to be honest. And I think he just needs a win, really, Whittaker. Not that he's on some slide, obviously, because he's not. But yeah, as you said, it's been stop-start for him over the last couple of years. And so I think it's important that he just finds whatever way to get it done and not get suckered into. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think about the fight against Adesanya? Because I felt like Whittaker, he didn't fight like himself, and it was almost like he wanted to prove something. Like he'd gotten suckered in a little bit to what Adesanya was saying and the way he was being portrayed. But yeah, what did you make of that fight?
Well, I think, with the Whittaker and Adesanya, I had a feeling that Whittaker was already beat before he got in the cage, because I think there's that much hype around Adesanya and like his career outside of the UFC as well, that he's got to win the belt. I think that did get into Rob's head a little bit.
Yeah, I thought the mental aspect was sort of in favour of Adesanya. You could tell right from the press conferences. Obviously, Adesanya, New Zealand native, Robert Whittaker, Australian, obviously born in New Zealand, but obviously it was in Perth, I believe, or something like that. And you could just tell that right from the get-go, Adesanya was right in his head, right from his head. And obviously the whole build-up was surrounding Adesanya. Obviously at that time he was 17-0. Obviously just came off of a win over Gastelum. Everyone was hyping up Adesanya, and he was saying, I'm the man to beat Robert Whittaker in his backyard. What are you going to do about it, Robert? And he had no answer for that. And stepping into the cage, you could tell from the stare downs to the weigh-ins, just mentally, it was like the same what I was referring to earlier. Mentally, he was not 100% in that fight. He got rocked right before the final bell, the first round, didn't he? And then from then on in, Adesanya just ran through Whittaker, and fair play to him. And he's got a tough one coming soon, hasn't he? Adesanya, Paulo Costa.
Yeah.
Be interested to see what your thoughts are on that one. I'm going Adesanya, but yeah.
Yeah, well, just quickly on that last one, I mean, I think you're right about Adesanya versus Whittaker, and I think it was, the thing that was frustrating is that Whittaker is so much better than that performance, and he was, again, like, I'm not, although I do train a little bit in like jiu-jitsu and Thai boxing and stuff. I'm not going to pretend I'm Dan Hardy, but I could see, you could see Whittaker was making very linear entries and repetitive entries, and it was like every time he was landing less and he was getting tagged more. And like you said, after the first knockdown, it just felt inevitable. As for Adesanya versus Costa, yeah, you know what? My gut was kind of, although I think Adesanya is undoubtedly a better mixed martial artist, and more of I was talking to Dan Hardy about this yesterday, actually. Costa is more of the modern athlete in MMA. Adesanya feels more like a martial artist, and I think it's just one of those, isn't it, where it's hard to know if Costa's gonna put Adesanya under too much pressure and really stifle him, or whether that will actually play into Adesanya's hands, a bit like when Whittaker blitzed him and Adesanya just made those reads and picked him apart. So I think before my gut was kind of saying Costa, but now the more I think about it and the more footage I watch of both guys, the more I lean towards Adesanya. Yeah, what about you two?
Well, at the minute, I don't think there's many people in the UFC that's going to be troubling Adesanya, unless he did make the super fight with John Jones. But if he was, well, hopefully he does end up fighting Paulo Costa. I've got a feeling we might have another Adesanya Romero on our hands.
You think?
It could be like, depends what mindset obviously Costa goes in at, because Adesanya, I don't blame him fighting the way he did against Romero, because Romero and Costa, they're very similar fighters. They're not the best martial artists, but I think it was Dan Hardy I seen said it. If it's like Derek Lewis, you fight Derek Lewis, if he catches you, you go into sleep, but if you pick your shots right, you're going to make him look silly.
Yeah.
I think back then with the Whittaker fight with Adesanya, I think it's one of those where Adesanya's got Whittaker's number. He can obviously read him well. I think with Paulo Costa, I think it'll be the same. I mean, we've all been a fan of Costa's vicious highlight reel knockouts and his performance over Romero, and whether or not you scored it to Romero remains to be seen. But don't get me wrong, Costa deserves to be at the high seat of the table in the middleweight division. You got to put nothing but respect into his name. But I think with Adesanya, I think Costa, you see Costa across social media, you can tell he's very emotional. He's so into this fight. He's so gassed up for Adesanya, and that could play into Adesanya's hands, because Adesanya hasn't even said anything to him yet in like press conferences or the weigh-ins, and Costa's already got into, well, Adesanya's already, what they say, Adesanya's living rent-free in Costa's head, and it's one of them ones. They haven't even spoken or gone head-to-head yet, and I think I agree with Mason. I think we could see another Adesanya Romero, because I don't think Adesanya is going to want to be too cautious, because with Adesanya, he's so versatile in a striker, but with Costa, he's just got that one punch sort of like knockout. He's so predominant in that sort of department. So Adesanya's got to be cautious in his approach to Costa, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see like a ball fest for 5 rounds. And I don't blame him at all for that, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I think you guys touched on something important there, which is going back to Romero versus Adesanya as well. I never have any problem with someone playing it safe. I know some fans get frustrated. Honestly, the stakes are so high. Every single fight, like unlike any other sport, the stakes are so high, and you do what you have to do to win, right? I think that's the most important thing. And I see where you guys are coming from about it potentially being a similar fight to the Romero one when Adesanya faces Costa. I do think, although we've not seen as much from Adesanya's side in terms of verbal, there have been a couple of times where, I think Costa was ringside. I can't remember if Costa was ringside for the Whittaker fight or the Gastelum fight against Adesanya. But I remember them just kind of staring at each other through the cage and stuff. And I don't know, I think although Adesanya's not said as much, I do get the feeling he really doesn't like Costa either, doesn't respect him. And I think closer to the fight, I think there's going to be some genuine heat there. And that does give me a little bit of hope that we might see, even if it's more from Costa's end. I think he's more likely to let that bleed into the fight. I don't think Adesanya is, but who knows? It might mean it might make for fireworks. It's nice every now and then when you get two people who genuinely don't like each other. Not that I need that to be excited for a fight. I mean, just look at this weekend with Whittaker and Till. I'm kind of thrilled to be watching that, even though they've been very much respectful and kind of joking with one another. But yeah, we'll see. I do think Adesanya vs Costa will be it's one to look forward to for the kind of latter part of the year.
It just adds fuel to the fire, doesn't it? Because obviously with Conor versus Khabib, like I'm a huge Conor fan, but I knew right from the get-go Khabib was just going to dominate him. And I think with these big fights, this is from my personal opinion, we sort of need the hypes and leading towards the fight. We need the sort of the trash talking, because it just adds more excitement to the fight. And I think it doesn't have to be bubble, because you look at Masvidal Diaz as well. Like there's sort of so much hype behind that fight, and obviously there was a bit of talking, but what added fuel to the fire in terms of the hype aspect, we got a belt on the line. Unnecessarily, we didn't need the belt. Like it was stupid. Yeah. But we got the BMF title, and it just added, like I said, the fuel to the fire. It just got more people. It probably did a lot more bits for pay-per-view numbers because there was a belt on the line.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's. Yeah, you touched on it there with kind of Conor and Khabib. It did just. I mean, a Conor fight and a title fight, and now actually a Khabib fight, because obviously he's grown massively into his popularity. But any of those things on their own are going to shift, pay-per-views. Combine them, they're going to. But then when you add on top of that the animosity there, it's. And I think Adesanya kind of, he had some heat with Brunson, but I kind of feel like this could be like a really definitive fight for him. And it maybe sounds strange to say that because he's already beaten. He had a great run up to the title. Even though the Silva fight was a little bit weird, that's still, I mean, people have very contrasting opinions on that. But he's beaten Silva, he's beaten Whittaker, he's beaten Gastelum, but he's not had like a proper rivalry. And I'm not saying this will turn into a rivalry, but it's as Adesanya, as someone who is emerging as one of the next stars of the sport. I mean, again, I think it would be silly to predict that he or anyone is going to get to Conor level in the near future. But when you look at that kind of tier below, and you've got Masvidal and Diaz, Adesanya is one of the more popular names and kind of crossing over a bit. And I think having not just having another fight, but having a fight where the promos and the face-offs and everything really have that extra kind of dimension and animosity on the show could be like a big thing for Adesanya's career and just attracting even more people to watch him, you know.
Well, on another topic in MMA, we've got another Masvidal situation at the weekend. Now former Cage Warriors fighter Reece McKee got told, I think Sunday that he's fighting at the UFC at the weekend. So
yeah,
we've got another 6 days notice fight. With people like take fights on that short notice, you've got to give them the respect they deserve. But I didn't know if you guys were aware of that. But if you are, what are your thoughts on Reece McKee wanting to fight?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know loads about McKee specifically. I know when it was first announced, a lot of people were like, damn, I love him, and this is not good. But then I suppose now I'm seeing the other side where people are, I've seen a lot of support for him as well. So I can't really comment too much on how he'll get on specifically, but I do agree with you, like, have to give someone respect for stepping in like that. And it was the biggest question ahead of Masvidal versus Usman, wasn't it? It's like, who benefits more? Because on one hand, you've got someone who's not necessarily in fighting shape or in that mindset. Not say like Masvidal, he was training. Seems he was even training specifically for Usman. But you've got that thing of what shape are they in? What's their mindset? How prepared are they? But that's as big of an unknown for the person they're facing as the fans, So it's hard to say. It definitely adds an extra level of intrigue. I don't know. What do you reckon, James?
It's like I said, like Mace said, you've got to give fighters respect for stepping in on short notice. I think with Masvidal, I don't know if you guys saw, but it did. I think it was the best pay-per-view buy since Khabib Conor, and I think that's because you had the star fighter in Mas. I think personally, it was Masvidal that sort of brought the pay-per-view numbers up a bit, as well as the Pettyana, Jose Aldo, the Max Holloway versus Volkanovski. But when you look at it on paper, Usman Burns, so what, average title fight. But Masvidal, the BMF champion, the guy who loves to give it verbally across social media and in real life, and obviously it just added a bit more excitement towards the fight. And with fighters stepping in on short notice, I mean, you've got to put some respect in their name because they're so keen to get the win on their promotional debut, and they're keen to put their name out there because obviously, with no disrespect to Cage Warriors and Bellator, the UFC is the promotion that everyone wants to be a part of. And I think with McKee, he's got a very tough test. Is it with Chimaev, who came off of a very good performance early on? So he's stepping in on short notice as well, Chimaev. So it'll be interesting to see how the fight plays out. But with regards to the topic of those stepping in on short notice, it just shows their hunger and their determination to succeed in the sport of mixed martial arts.
Yeah, it's a massive. I mean, as I was saying earlier, when you consider how high the stakes are, and I know it's not like boxing. A loss is not deemed the end of the world, but it's still, it's still a big thing to happen to someone, and so to risk that on such short notice, I think is incredibly courageous. But likewise, I wouldn't blame anyone who doesn't do that. I do, again, I'd similarly respect someone who says, you know what, I want to be better prepared. I want to go into any fight with more of a training camp. Again, it's that risk reward thing. And like you said, if you're making your debut in the promotion, then not to say that you're not going to get there later on, but I guess you don't know for certain, right? And so for some people, they'll be like, if this is my only shot, then again, they have to weigh it up and completely understand why someone would leap up the opportunity, even if it's a tough one.
What have you made of Fight Island so far?
I don't know. I've got mixed feelings. I wrote a piece after the first Fight Island event about how it was kind of a mirage all along, and I think we all knew that in terms of they weren't going to be fighting on the beach and whatnot. No. Like, it would be silly to think so, but I still just felt like it was a bit. The setup was a little bit soulless. I think they've had some fun with the promotion, the promotional side of it. I feel like they could let that bleed in. Again, one of the things I wrote was like the super fight kind of climate at the moment is leading to a lot of people accusing UFC of focusing on entertainment more than other things. They're getting compared to WWE, and I know that's being kind of put out there as a criticism. But one of the things I said was that maybe they should lean into it a bit more. Just have a bit more fun. Sometimes they take themselves too seriously. There's that. There's also the kind of sport washing elements of it taking place in Abu Dhabi, them paying for everything, and having people at the press conferences asking questions about tourism in Abu Dhabi, which I'm not so keen on. But then I'm also, a lot of people will make a criticism like that, and then someone will say, well, I assume you're not going to watch it then. It's difficult. It's a difficult one because at the end of the day, I'm a sports fan and the world is in a really weird place at the moment. And I've been incredibly grateful that there has been sport to watch, whether it be the return of football, which thankfully has been done as safely as possible. And UFC, I think they've slipped up a little bit at times, to be honest. But generally speaking, there's not been too much that's gone wrong. So the fact that they've found a way to carry out fights full stop, I am, I suppose, grateful for that, even if I don't know if the circumstances are the best for that. But yeah, I mean, what did you guys think? What did you make of the first couple of events?
Well, personally, I do. There's been parts where they've slipped up a bit, but that's because obviously no one's ever had to experience something like this. So there's the probability of something like that happening. But in terms of the cards and the fights themselves, I know we've had a few events before Fight Island, but I've loved having these events on because obviously they've put quite a bit into it, like in terms of the type of fights they've been putting on, because the fight like UFC 251 3 title fights, it could have eased them 3 fights could have easily been main events on their own. But the UFC decided to chuck them all on one card, and as James touched on, that was the highest bought pay-per-view since Conor Khabib. So obviously Masvidal did a lot to that, but the fights on there as well, they added quite a bit, because I know quite a people were excited for Volkanovski and Holloway too, which we'll touch on soon if you want about the result. But sure. What did you think, James, of the cards that we've had?
No, I completely agree with that, Alex. I think there are aspects of it which I enjoyed, obviously the promotional side and the entertainment sort of aspect, whereby they got the big names on early on, but it's a tough one because we're in a global pandemic right now, and I think they've tried their utmost best to try and run a smoothly run industry. And obviously, as soon as you get to Abu Dhabi, you quarantine for 2 days, and as soon as you get to Vegas, obviously you quarantine for a couple of days. And they've gone about it in the right way, but I think there's aspects behind the scenes which they could have approached differently. And I think Dana White was just so keen to get the fights going on, and obviously there have been sort of drawbacks to that. It was obviously Jacare Souza tested positive for COVID-19 before 249, and then in and around that sort of time, the fight week, there were other, as well as his cornermen and other trained fighters. There were so many fighters within that hotel and within that arena, so there are aspects of Dana White's antics where I'm not too fond of with regards to Fight Island, and it was just his eagerness and just to sort of get the UFC back up and running. And I think the money sort of aspect, he needed that in terms of getting the fights going. And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of the UFC and all of that. I think Dana White and Sean Shelby, etc., were just too keen to get back quickly, and then we've seen some drawbacks of the UFC. And don't get me wrong, I've enjoyed Fight Island so far, and we've seen so many great fights, but there are some potential drawbacks when you look at it after this weekend, which will be the final event.
Well, firstly, you guys are right. The cards have been ridiculous. Like, the fights have been terrific. And what you said, Mason, about like that, having 3 title fights on one card when they all could have been main events. Early on, I was a bit, not just Fight Island, but when they started hosting events again, I was looking at some of the cards and I was thinking, well, the cards are fantastic, but would they not be better off spacing them out? Would they not be better off? Because I didn't know how many fighters would be available over the course of the coming months, and I thought it would be safer for them to ensure they had a good main event each time out. But they have managed to get most of the best. Look at the names that are involved at the moment. They've not had trouble getting big fighters involved, getting multiple big fights on their cards. So fair enough. And as you said, I suppose it's keeping that revenue coming in, keeping the cards as strong as possible, not just resting on one good fight to sell a card. But yeah, I think as well, James, like you said, maybe a bit too eager. I think it was a pride thing for Dana White. I think he really took pride in them being the first sport back. I mean, they were barely gone at all. So I still find it weird to say that when they returned or because they it wasn't long at all that they weren't hosting any events. But yeah, I do think it was maybe a pride thing a little bit for Dana White, and I think at times that can be, I don't know. Yeah, sometimes that irks me a little bit, and I think, as you said, like early on when Souza tested positive, and there was all the footage of everyone, people just weren't taking it seriously enough. To be completely honest, it seems like they've improved on that as much as you can when you consider it's a sport that involves people, being in constant close contact. So yeah.
Well, I said before about the Alex and
Yeah.
Max fight. No, James is going to give me
too happy with the result.
James will give me a bit of stick for this, but I scored it 3-2 to Alex. How did you guys have it?
Shocking.
You go, James. I can tell you want to.
I've literally been on a fair few shows since talking about this. I've just been absolutely fuming. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't a daylight robbery. I can accept that. I'm a Max Holloway fan, but I'm also a Volkanovski fan. I think the first 2 rounds, we just saw a different Max Holloway. You could tell he wanted the belt back. And I think stylistically, he changed up his game plan to sort of put a lot of pressure on Volkanovski and make Volkanovski go into deep water. And you got to commend Max Holloway for that, because it's early on in that fight week, I was not keen on Holloway at all. And he was like, yeah, I've just been zooming my coaches. I haven't been sparring at all. I was like, Jesus Christ, do you really want to be saying that? I was like, Volkanovski's taking this one. But the first few rounds, we just saw Holloway step forward, put the pressure on right from the get-go. I think the controversial bit was the round 3. Mm-hmm. I edged it to Holloway just because, obviously, for the final minute, I'd say Volkanovski started to get back into it, because he thought, obviously, oh, Christ, I need to get back into it, so I could be 3 rounds down. I think with the judges, sort of the system, they're thinking the champion is 2-0 down. He sort of got back into it at the final minute or so, at the last hurdle of the round. So we're going into the championship round. We're going to score it to Volkanovski. So it makes it an entertaining final 2 rounds. Fair enough. They gave it to Volkanovski. And I think the final 2 rounds, 4 and 5, I scored it to Volkanovski. But by that time, I think it was just too late. I mean, like I said, it wasn't a robbery, but I think Holloway edged that one, in my opinion. Yeah,
you know what? I think, first of all, I agree with you. It wasn't a robbery, and people throw that word around way too much, and it's annoying because it really does. It takes away our ability to have a genuine conversation about the scoring system in the sport. I scored it to Holloway. I scored it to Holloway in real time, and I agree with you. Like, for someone who's normally a slow, not a slow starter necessarily in a negative sense, but just in the sense that he makes a lot of reads early on and he doesn't rush, and then you see the benefit of that in the later rounds. I thought it was really impressive, considering the lack of sparring and the distance to his coaches, that even if they had been there and he had been sparring, I still think it was impressive that he changed his game plan and put the pressure on early. And we saw, he reaped the benefits of that in clearly taking the first 2 rounds with like decisive moments right near the end of each round, really clutch stuff. I agree. I think after that, every round was close. I think 4 and 5, like you, I'd scored for Alex. Round 3, I think I agree. I think that was the closest one. And I did give it to Max, but again, I've got no problem if someone gives it to Alex. I really don't. I think the only thing I will say is this: it's one of those where I think some people have come. I mean, you look at Luke Thomas, right, who says he watched the fight 49 times, and he makes a really good case for why it wasn't a robbery and why, in fact, Volkanovski arguably, did win it. The only problem is, and he kind of acknowledged this in one of his most recent videos, you can't. The judges don't get to do that. The judges don't get to watch it 50 times, and so even if they did score it for Volkanovski, I don't believe. Unfortunately, some of the recent judging decisions the judging decisions in the UFC for a little while now, but certainly at recent events, I don't believe they gave Volkanovski that win because they saw all these minute things that Luke Thomas saw after 50 watches. I don't believe that's why they gave it to him. I'm not saying. By the way, I'm not suggesting some conspiracy, behind why they did give it to him. I'm just saying. I think if they gave it to him, fair enough if that's the way they saw it. But I just found it a bit. I don't know. It's a difficult one, and it's a difficult one to provide like a solid answer on. I do feel for Max though. I do feel for Max, and he's in this he's not in no man's land now. And if they announce the third fight tomorrow, I know some people would be annoyed, but I would kind of be like, I get it. But it's a difficult position, isn't it, when you're in his position of having held the belt before and you've lost twice to the incumbent champion. Thankfully, it's a really stacked division, and there are several names he's not faced yet. So whether it's Alex or someone else, in 2 years, he's still only 28, is it? He can be. There is a path back for him, but I suppose maybe this shows why there was an argument for not having him go straight back against Alex. I understand why there was, because the first fight was, I think it was close but clear, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It was competitive, but I think most people pretty happy with the fact that Volkanovski did enough to win. But there was also an argument to just, not rush Max back into that fight. And maybe seeing it a little bit further down the line would have been good as well. But like I said, so many options for him now, entertaining fights that will get him back in the title picture. So we'll see how it plays out, I guess.
Well, I'm going to switch sports now. What has been your thoughts on the Premier League this season?
Like I said, kind of glad it's back, although I was very much hesitant at first that, whether or not it was the safe thing to do. I'm glad, given they did do it pretty safely, that it got finished. I know people are kind of trying to apply the asterisk of, the drinks breaks, the 5 subs and stuff like that. I mean, Liverpool had the league well and truly won. So, again, as I said, I'm not, as someone who's pretty neutral, I have no strong feelings for or against Liverpool. I think they thoroughly deserved it. And I don't think that the 5 subs and the drinks breaks is much of an asterisk on their title win. I feel more for the teams, for other teams. I mean, look at Sheffield United. Could well have had been guaranteed. It would have almost certainly been guaranteed a place in Europe. It felt like, but the break in momentum, hurt them more than most teams. So yeah, a weird one. But I suppose. I mean, I'm trying to cast my mind back and look at the season on the whole. Even before the break, and it feels like so long ago. So it's kind of weird to think about. But I think, although not a competitive title race, there were other things. Like, it has been a close run, relegation battle. Obviously going down to the final day to an extent, and even with the European spots not being decided fully yet, and just I think next season will probably be even more interesting, because I think Chelsea have been building still a lot of defensive problems, but I've been impressed with Lampard generally speaking, and some of the signings they've made. Likewise, Man United, I think I was guilty of dismissing the possibility that Fernandes could single-handedly change United's fortunes, but he has almost done that, really. I know Greenwood has been a great addition as well, in terms of being kind of getting more first team time. But I think it'll be interesting to see, and with City kind of will have something to prove. I just think next season will be probably even more interesting. What about you two?
Well, this season on a whole, obviously Liverpool deserved it undoubtedly, as much as it does pay me to say.
Yeah.
it has been nice at points watching them with the style they play. But like you say, with the teams that it has hit this break, Sheffield United, I thought there could have been a decent chance they could have got top 4.
Yeah.
And I felt sorry for him because now it looks really unlikely. Are they still in possible place for the Europa finish? I'm not.
I don't actually think they can even get Europa at this point, which is the crazy thing, right? Like as I said, it wasn't even that they might get Europe; it was that they might get top 4, specifically. Yeah. So,
I think with Sheffield United, obviously, we've all enjoyed them this season. I think they've been the fairy tale underdog story of the Premier League era. Everyone thought, oh, they're going to go straight down. I was one that was thinking that they were going to go straight down, but you got to commend Chris Wilder and give him the utmost respect. He's got the team playing well at the start of the season. Obviously, I think one thing that's sort of gone against them in recent weeks is the lack of support from the Bramall Lane faithful, and obviously there's nothing you could do about that. But obviously, going into the season, the home support was so crucial to Sheffield United's excellent home form. I think they were, like I said, they're on paper they're a relegation side team, but I think the way they gelled together early on in terms of the team as a whole, starting 11. The way they're just so close knit between the fans and the players, you've got to give them nothing but respect. I think in January they made a very good signing in Sander Berg from, I'm not sure where it was. I think it was Genk at the top of my head. Such a great player in the heart of midfield. And I think with Sheffield United, obviously the big factor that has gone against them in recent weeks is the lack of support, and there's obviously nothing they can do about that. But the goal that should have been away to Villa didn't help them as well. And I think when you look at it on paper, the season as a whole, Chris Wilder, in my opinion, is arguably been one of the managers of the season. It's been an underdog story. You've got to give them nothing but respect, regardless of where they finish. And obviously the Premier League season, I think I'm a Chelsea fan. I think it's been a touch and go for us this season. Last night showed it's ridiculous. Obviously, you scored 3 against the champion and scored 3 goals, conceded 5 goals. It was the traditional Liverpool back in the day under Brendan Rodgers. You'd score so many but concede a lot as well. And I think with Chelsea next year, obviously, I don't know. I mean, I'm a fan of Vern. I'm a fan of Ziyech, no problem. But when you bring in Havertz as well, I mean, obviously, I'd love to have Havertz, but I'm not overly fond of bringing him in. I think you could buy all the attacking players in the world, but if you don't improve in the defence, we're not going anywhere. And I think we need to improve defensively next year if we're going to stand a chance of competing.
Well, there are a couple of things you touched on there, I mean, we've just today kind of done our, I don't think it's live yet, but we've done our Premier League at the Independent, our breakdown of player of the season, manager of the season, moment, goal, best 11, all of those things. And I went for Wilder for manager of the season. I was really torn between him and Sean Dyche, actually, because when you look at what he's done in recent weeks with the lack of resources in terms of how few first team players have been fit, and the behind the scenes, the kind of disputes over contracts and stuff like that, it really is phenomenal what he's done. But like I said, I just gave it to Wilder because I feel like if we hadn't had this break, it could have been, like you said, the fairy tale thing of coming up and going straight into the Champions League. I mean, it would have been the most impressive thing probably since Leicester actually winning the league, But yeah, and on Chelsea, I think you're right. I think Ziyech and Werner are good players, but there's a little bit of me that's like, is this it feels a little bit like a FIFA Ultimate Team, like Pulisic, Werner and Ziyech. I think they're all great players. There's nothing to say they won't be great together. And add Havertz into that as well. But I'm until I see it work, I'm gonna be like a little bit. I'm going to hold back a little bit on getting carried away because I don't know. I don't know how. It's tough to say how well they'll mix. And as you said, it's all well and good making those recruitments, but it's at the other end of the pitch really that there are issues at the moment. But that's a difficult one to solve in as much as for years people have said stuff like, oh, this team or that team, if only they had a world-class centre-back, if only they had a world-class striker. I mean, you probably can't even count the number of world-class centre-backs on one hand, right? It's probably like 4, maybe. You know, I'm thinking about like Van Dijk, Ramos, maybe Koulibaly, you know, like, yeah, maybe a couple more, but regardless, you can't just go out and get these. Can't just go out and get these players.
No.
But then you've seen teams like Burnley and Sheffield United. Again, not so much Sheffield recently, but teams that show that they're that do have strong defences. And I wonder if teams should just start being a little bit more calculated when it comes to signing, making defensive signings and looking to clubs like that. But then also it's like they defend well because they're obviously drilled so well on that. And I don't know whether that's something Lampard has a handle on yet. You know, you could bring in good defenders, but if they're being coached poorly, then yeah, who knows? But I'm excited because it could, regardless. And I know we'll see what happens. But if Chelsea get top 4, I think that's a terrific achievement for Lampard in his first season. And you think about like the FA Cup as well. I just think it's been a really it's been, you couldn't hope for too much more from a first season with Lampard in charge. I think when there's obviously going to be, fans love him from his playing days, and no one wants to see him fail, and you kind of desperately like crossing your fingers that won't happen. And yeah, I just think, who knows? Yeah, I don't know. Depending on how those offensive signings come in, like I don't know. We could end up looking at a slightly more competitive title race. Not that I think you guys are going to win, but it could at least be more than a 2-horse race. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, I've got a question. With the 3 teams that are competing for the top 4 now, obviously United, Chelsea, and Leicester, who do you think is going to get the 2, 3rd, and 4th?
It's Chelsea have got Wolves, right?
Yeah.
It's not an easy game, but I think I'm right in saying that if United and Chelsea both win, that they've sealed 3rd and 4th, right? So I think Leicester have obviously been a little bit hit and miss since coming back, and I think United will beat Leicester. I do think United will beat Leicester. I know they obviously slipped up against us and were poor last week as well, but I think I think the players will just be. I think with players like Greenwood, Martial, and Rashford, I just think they're going to be so motivated and be a bit of a nightmare for Leicester. So I think United will win there. And yeah, hesitantly, I think Chelsea as well. I do think so. But I could see a Chelsea Wolves. I could see a draw. That complicates things a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
I'm just going to see if I can pull up the Premier League table. Sorry. But I'm just thinking like, if Chelsea and Wolves draw, and United beat Leicester, then Chelsea.
I think United need a point to confirm top 4.
Yeah.
Same with us.
Yeah. So there you go. I mean, I think Chelsea draw with Wolves at least. So I think United and Chelsea get it. Still a really good campaign for Leicester, obviously.
Yeah.
Like I know they were second for a long time, but it's top. 5th is still a good result, and I've been impressed with Rodgers for the most part at Leicester, I have to say.
Well, last question I've got related to football is, if you can give a prediction on next season for the winner, who have you got?
You know what? I suppose Liverpool are the easy answer, but I don't know. Like I said, I think City will come back with a bit of a vengeance, and it's difficult at the moment. It's tough to say what the recruitments are going to be for either team. It doesn't sound like Liverpool are going to be doing too much, but I will. it also depends on. I think it also depends on how the Champions League plays out this term in terms of where City's priorities are going to be. Of course, City are going to want to win back the league, but obviously for the last several years, the Champions League has been their priority. So if they don't go all the way this year, then again, I think they'll be a bit torn. Whereas I think Liverpool's focus next term will be on retaining it more so than the Champions League. Yeah, tough one. I will go for Liverpool, but I do expect it to be much closer run than this year. Yeah. What about you guys?
Well, I'm going
Fernandes to take you to the title.
Yeah, United's getting it. It's like we're back. No, realistically, I'm hoping it's going to be a 4-horse race next year. United, Chelsea, City, and Liverpool, because that'll be great to see. And if it goes down to the final game, I think for people that are watching the league that are neutral, I think they'd rather see it go down to the wire than
definitely
be 20 points clear. So I'm gonna go with City, as much as it does pain me to say, but I do think it. United, Chelsea, Liverpool, and City will be up there next year.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think Liverpool have just been a cut above the rest of the pack throughout from day one, really. I've got nothing but respect for Jurgen Klopp. I think it was a long time coming. They got to the Champions League final, they lost to Real Madrid. Next season, they beat Tottenham in the final, and I think now this year, Jurgen Klopp's priority was the league, and then when you've got Salah, Firmino, and Mane up top, they're on their day. They're capable of anything. They're capable of scoring past any defence. I think he's sort of got the team playing Jurgen's way, and I think right from the get-go, they've just been above the rest. They've been more prepared for the league, whereas with Pep, I've said this for a while. I think defensively, since the loss of Company, they haven't really replaced him. And Laporte was out I think he got injured in the Community Shield, was out until the new year. I think they never really replaced him. They had to drop Fernandinho back, and I think they were slacking at defence. And I think from then, by the time Laporte got back, Liverpool just ran through the league. And I think next year it'll be a lot closer, because it's like you said, will Pep's sort of priority be on the Champions League? And it depends how well they finish this year in the Champions League, because they're still in it. I think they're 2-1 up against Real. And if they win the Champions League, a big if, then I reckon his priority will be to win back and reclaim the title. And I think it'll be a lot closer than people make out, because this year, like I said, Liverpool, they were miles clear, and rightly so. And I think next year it'll be a lot closer. It'll be interesting to see how the likes of we talk about City, Chelsea, United. It'll be interesting to see how Tottenham and Arsenal respond, because they've had abysmal seasons by their standards. So it'll be a lot I think it'll be a lot more entertaining next year, because we're starting in October. We're starting to get the fans back. Obviously, we're not going to have a full capacity, but we talk about the 12th man. They do play a big role in the football in the home side, and they do put the pressure on. So it'll be good to see how close it'll be next year, and what the likes of Jose Mourinho and Mikel Arteta are going to do to sort of get last season's disappointment behind them, and where they go on from next year.
Yeah, I think Arteta is one like Lampard of it, where the jury's kind of out. There's been some really promising bits from him at times, but Arsenal, that squad is just a bit. Again, it's imbalanced, right? They've got a lot of good options kind of up top. Midfield is kind of hit and miss, but defensively still need to. Again, I'm not going to say overhaul, because that suggests like in one transfer window you're going to replace everyone. It's not like that, but they definitely have a soft spot in the centre of defence, a bit like Chelsea. And like I said, I think interesting to see how they get on. I'm also intrigued to see how the end of the Champions League goes, especially when you consider that once we get past the round of 16, it's like one-off ties. And that could really change. I mean, look at Real. Real have been in decent form, and obviously they've been clutch in winning La Liga. City. I'd hesitantly say I think City will scrape past Real Madrid. Wouldn't be surprised if Real came back though. But yeah, I'm just really interested to see how that plans out, especially when you look at the side. The way the draw for the semis as well has panned out. I'm pretty sure it's like. What is it? PSG, Atalanta, or
Napoli, I think.
Yeah, but basically we're going to see a team. We're likely to see a team in the final that like it could be a first time or certainly first time in a long time winner. So, and it'd be interesting to see how those kind of single leg ties affect things. Should be fun though.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it the one leg tie sort of benefits City in a way because you've seen them. You've seen them do well in the away legs and then sort of drop off towards the quarterfinals. Obviously over the years, like Barcelona have just knocked them out at the final hurdle. But whereas with the game being decided over 120 minutes, like 90, maybe 120 minutes, it sort of suits Pep in a way. And I think now, if there was any time to win the Champions League, it'd be now for Pep, in my opinion.
One thing I do think could really hurt them though is just like Jesus is just not. He's not, got going really since the restart, and he, in many games he's not needed to, because elsewhere players have been really good around him. But again, in a big game, in clutch moments, is one of those where it's gonna fall to him at some point, and you just, can you trust him to put it away? And actually, just one last thing on City. I mean, for like them escaping kind of the ban, essentially, I think is huge in terms of keeping De Bruyne, because he said himself earlier this year, 1 year you could maybe live without Champions League football. 2 years is a lot to go without in a short career. I think them getting out of that, will be. Otherwise, I could have certainly seen. Look at Barcelona at the moment, who are kind of well off of it right now. I could definitely see them, or even, I know Real Madrid are always the obvious answer when we look abroad, but I could definitely have seen De Bruyne going if it weren't for City kind of getting out of the ban.
Well, for me, off football related, I don't know how many questions James has got left, but something I wanted to ask is, for someone that wants to get into the sports media industry, if you could give some advice, what would you give to them?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, I think the first one would definitely be to have more than one sport in your arsenal. Certainly, because, like I said earlier, although football is the main sport that British publications cover, it's so hard to get in somewhere by just wanting to be a football writer, because everyone has a decent knowledge of football. I mean, most people have a decent knowledge of football nowadays, right? The punditry's gotten so good. There's so much coverage that, most people can have an intelligent conversation about it. And unless you are like a prodigious talent as a writer, and have an encyclopedic knowledge of football, and I'm not saying, there might be people watching this who have both of those, great, but you're a rarity if you do have those, those things. So you need to be like phenomenally well versed in just one sport. Well, in football, if you're going to try and pitch yourself as a football writer, it's much better to have other sports, and specifically to have a niche if you can. I mean, like I said, I'm still always learning about MMA, but I'd like to think we've had some pretty, intelligent discussions about, various aspects of it today. And I think that really helped me get a job at the Independent. That was the main thing really, that I had that when no one else on the desk did, having tennis as well. So, and if you're someone who only really is interested in one sport, whether that's football or something else, look at the other sports that you do have a bit of an interest in. And even if you don't have a clear second and third favourite sport, just do a bit of research. Like I said, we have to cover everything. I had to live blog the Ashes last summer. I had to live blog the Rugby World Cup. I appreciate both cricket and rugby, but I'm a fair weather fan. I only watch those tournaments, generally speaking. Like a lot of people just watch Wimbledon. That's fine. But around the time of those tournaments, I had to do my research. I had to make sure I was clued up on the terminology and whatnot. So if you're someone who only has one sport really, like in your arsenal, then it can be done. Read up on other ones and try and have more than one. That's always the first thing that comes to my mind when people ask that question.
Yeah, no, I've got a fair few left, sorry, but I'll try and keep it short because I know we've just been gone on for just over an hour, so I appreciate your time, mate.
Sure.
I'm going into my final year at uni, and I'm studying journalism. As part of my special investigation, I'm doing something UFC related, and I'm doing 3 features. Obviously, one on the fans and fans/journalists, one on the fighters, and one just with the company as a whole. And it's good because I'm trying to get 3 journalists on, and obviously with you, it would be my second. So I'm doing all right so far. With my question with the UFC, I've got, I think, 2 at the top of my head with regards to my special investigation. So obviously, the UFC has been around since the early 90s, and obviously they've grown so much since then. Can they ever surpass boxing, in your opinion?
Yes, I think so. And most people I speak to who are boxing fans, they always say, I mean, yeah, like they'll watch UFC a little bit and say, yeah, I mean, look, it's never going to be as big as boxing. I think it can be. I'm not saying it will be, but I think it can be because I just think I think it's doing certain things that boxing is not doing right now. I know we get frustrated at judging decisions every now and then, but I think most of us are pretty happy to put that down to poor judging, or just maybe we just disagree. But in boxing, some of the decisions, there's a lot more to it than people just not being good at their job. I'm sorry, there's some nasty stuff that goes on in terms of judging and scoring in boxing. So that's one thing which people are getting increasingly annoyed at. And also the fights that just don't get made in boxing that do get made in MMA. Every now and then a fight will escape us in MMA. But generally speaking, I mean, just look at Usman versus Masvidal. That's a fight people have wanted for quite a few months now. And there were disputes, about pay and stuff, but they got it over the line. Generally, the people that deserve to fight each other. And that's something that boxing is not. We don't see that enough in boxing because it goes back to that. Sorry if I'm rambling on this answer, by the way.
No.
But it goes back to that thing about you're allowed to lose in MMA. It's accepted. It happens to almost everyone. Even Usman, as dominant as he is, he's got a defeat from earlier in his career.
Yeah.
In boxing, they're petrified of someone not having an undefeated record and how that will damage their marketability. That's why we saw the draw in the first Wilder versus Fury fight when Fury, I think, in my opinion, I think most people's opinion, you can quite clearly, you can watch that fight 50 times. If you know how scoring works, Tyson Fury won. Doesn't matter if you got knocked down twice. You can do the maths and it works out every single time. So, they're too afraid that they try to protect fighters' records, and people are getting sick of it, So I think there are just certain things boxing is doing, and I think it's losing its grip on fans. And I think MMA and UFC in particular, is doing more and more to attract fans.
Obviously, with the UFC. Early on in the early days, obviously we had the events over in America, and they started off very small, and everyone across Europe and Great Britain were leaning towards the boxing sort of aspect because it has been around longer, and you obviously had the likes of Mike Tyson, the Holyfields, etc. back in the day. How much has the UFC as an organisation changed since '93, particularly across Europe and Great Britain?
Well, I think the UFC recognises the UK as one of its key areas in terms of target audience outside of the States. And I think it's just, when you look at boxing, the US and Mexico, have a lot of history with boxing, but Britain is one of the biggest countries in terms of how popular boxing is. So I think it follows that MMA was always, going to attract some of those boxing fans over. So I think it's done that. And I think as a result, it really is. I mean, when you consider that there are annual events at the O2, the biggest venue in the capital. I mean, look, it's not obviously quite Wembley Stadium, but aside from that, the biggest realistic venue they could get in the capital yearly, and they could probably come twice a year, really. I think it's grown massively, and we're now starting to see that in the fighters that are coming through. It's not just the likes of Conor McGregor and Darren Till. There are some really talented young fighters coming up. Just look at the recent Fight Island cards, and it's a young sport, so it's going to take time for a country to produce a wealth of fighters in MMA. But I think we are seeing that growth in those terms.
Just a quick fire ones, just to round it up, a couple of fun ones. Favorite fight on Fight Island so far?
Oh, off the top of my head, I would say Jan versus Aldo.
Yeah.
I think that was a really, really fun. Yeah, it's the first one that comes to mind. It was a really fun fight and cool to see a finish as well.
Who's the best person you've interviewed and why?
Oh, that is a really, really good question. So recently I've done a lot of I've been speaking to more personalities in UFC like Dan Hardy, John Anik. Dan Hardy I spoke to 2 or 3 times in the last week, and that was brilliant because he's obviously so insightful and passionate, and he's a really down to earth person as well. But it was also cool as a fan. Like when I spoke to him yesterday and we started touching more on him fighting again, like I was seeing a side of him that I've not seen, since I started watching MMA. The fighter Dan Hardy was starting to come out, the outlaw. So I would say Dan Hardy. Although I did interview, sorry to chuck another one, I did interview Tyson Fury in a kind of roundtable thing ahead of his WWE performance.
Yeah.
He was exactly like he is on TV. He was wearing the heavyweight champion suit. He was dancing around. So that was fun, but not the same as speaking to someone one-on-one over a long period of time.
Who do you think will be the next European UFC champion?
Oh, that's a really good question as well. I don't know. I'm blanking a bit, but I kind of feel like, you know what? Like, this is maybe a bit of an outside one.
Yeah.
I think Lerone Murphy is really talented. So maybe that's not next, but I can see him as a future. I can see him as a future champion. Oh god, but it's one of those. There's almost too many, and I'm immediately going to Brits. But that's a tough one.
Yeah. I've got one more UFC quickfire, and I've got a couple of football ones that I'll just shoot. And obviously, I appreciate your time. So thank you very much.
No, that's fine. No wrong.
Out of all the current UFC champions, who loses the belt first?
Okay, I'm not going to be super quick fire on that because I'm having to think about all of them, right?
No, that's fine.
There's a very good chance it's Stipe,
Yeah.
purely for the fact that he's fighting next month, right? And
Yeah.
DC is a very, very tough opponent, as he's shown. So I feel like that's kind of the logical one. I can see Usman hanging on for a while. I don't know how long Khabib will be about, but it's tough to see him losing, especially if he's going to retire soon. Adesanya, again, I can see hanging on to it. Volkanovski as well. Yeah, off the top of my head, I think I love Stipe, similar to Whittaker. I love everything about the way he carries himself, and I'm hesitantly picking him next month, but it could be him. It could be him in just a few weeks.
The Euros next year, it's obviously going to be a big tournament, maybe with or without the fans. So I'm very much looking forward to it. How do you assess England's chances, and who do you think will win it?
England's look. I love watching England. I really do. There's something as supporting a team like West Ham, who don't historically have, the the most talented players all together at once. It's nice to watch a team with so much talent as England, even if we don't always capitalise. I'm actually I think in recent weeks my opinion on that has changed, because you again look at how good Greenwood has been. I don't want to put too much pressure on someone like him, but there should I think there shouldn't be pressure on him. He should go to the Euros. I don't know if he'll be 19 by then, but still so young. And just Sterling has been good this season. Pope, I think, should probably be the next keeper. I still think we've got kind of some defensive frailties, and I still think we don't have that creative midfield, which, to an extent cost us against Croatia. That was, I think, where that match was kind of won and lost. But I think when you've got some attacking players like we do, and Foden coming through as well, I don't know, and Henderson's kind of improved a lot in recent years. I don't think we're going to win it, but I think we've got a semi-final. I think we've got a semi-final, maybe even a final in us. And as for the winner, I'll go Belgium. I know a bit of an outside bet, but they are in their golden generation, just as England were supposedly 15 years ago, and they've got the talent to beat anyone.
Yeah, 100%. Just quickly for me before I ask my next one. I completely agree. I think from an England's perspective, we've all been mapping out our routes to the final, even though it's not on this year. And the one thing that strikes me as a fan, Germany, Portugal, France, we face either one of them in the round of 16. So it's not ideal for us at all, isn't it? Yeah,
exactly. And that's the thing, when I said maybe a semi-final or final in us, I think it's if you get past one of those teams. I think it's the psychological boost, and I do think we're capable of, getting, in a one-off game, and I think we've just got to ensure that kind of a mental block was broken at the World Cup. I think not just the penalty shootout. I know we didn't have the hardest route to the semi-finals, but you can only beat who's in front of you, and I think we just need to try and push on from that. Hopefully the team will feel a little bit freer, and it will just be and I think one other thing I'll just say is that I like Southgate. I like the fact that we had a specific tactical setup in the in the World Cup, but then looking at the players that came through after the World Cup, he didn't just stick with the World Cup setup. He changed the defensive setup and stuff, and I think he does deserve credit, and I'm interested to see what he can do going forward.
Across the Premier League this season, who's impressed you the most?
Is that in terms of players?
Yeah, players. Yeah, sorry.
So I went with De Bruyne as my player of the season, actually.
Yeah, I agree.
I know it's maybe a bit weird not to pick a title winner, but again, you look at how far behind City were, partly because Laporte was missing, I think, and like you said, Kompany not being replaced, but I think De Bruyne had a big hand in the gap not being even bigger. And as I said, as I wrote for The Independent this morning, a bit like with Hazard a couple of years ago, when you watch De Bruyne, you feel at times like you are watching the best player in the world, bar Messi, I would say. But you feel like he's someone who could play at any club in the world, and you don't get that too often. As many talented players as there are in the Premier League, I've been extremely impressed with De Bruyne. I think I really do think he's a joy to watch,
Brentford, Fulham, Cardiff, Swansea. Who goes up by the playoffs?
It's such a lottery, isn't it? When you look at what happened to Leeds last year, and massive congrats to them for coming up. Brentford, Fulham, Swansea, Cardiff. You know what? I'm going to hesitantly say Brentford, even though they were the closest to automatic promotion. Again, I know it doesn't always go that way when it comes to the playoffs. But also, it would just be nice to see them come up, given Fulham, Cardiff and Swansea have all been in the top flight in recent years. I think Brentford will be really, really hungry. So fingers crossed for them.
Two more. Obviously, Jude Bellingham recently made a move to Borussia Dortmund. Do you think that youngsters who aren't given the chance in England should sort of push on and move across to European clubs?
100%. They should do it more. And this is the language student in me speaking now, but it's a British thing of we can be too self-absorbed. And yeah, the Premier League is a phenomenal league. Of course it is. I would, as a player, rather play in the Premier League than the Bundesliga. In all honesty, but like, it's people in other countries are more willing to explore. They're more willing to live abroad, to work abroad, to study abroad. And Brits, it's just not in our culture. So I think players should get more used to doing it, and I think they will reap the benefits. And we have seen that a little bit in recent years. And Dortmund specifically is just a fantastic club. So yeah, people should do it more. And again, having done a year abroad in Germany, when the Bellingham transfer was confirmed, I was like, oh man, it's such an exciting time for him. Don't know how much he realizes it yet, but it is just a great country and club to be involved with. So yeah, for sure more players should be doing it, 100%.
And finally, for me, obviously, there's been such a torn, and it's caused a lot of debate this year in the Premier League. But you've seen it work in Australia, and I'm a big fan of the way they use it. VAR. What's your overall assumption on it?
So I've always been pro VAR in the sense that it should be correcting decisions where I see the argument still that people would rather have a slower game than if you get the odd call wrong but don't slow the game down. I'm sorry, but no. When you look at how the slightest wrong decision can impact the future of a club, the difference between staying up, going down, getting Europe not, the calls have to be right, even if it slows down the game. That said, VAR has exposed the poor standard of refereeing because it's being used and it's still not getting stuff right. So I think, if anything, it's highlighted how poor some of the referees are. I think that's more an issue with the referees than the system itself, I think, is the point I'm trying to make. So yeah, we need better referees, but I am for VAR, and check the monitors more. Yeah, there's no excuse not to check the monitors more. That's the thing I want to see most next season.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I've dragged on a bit, but that's all from me. No. And Mason, I don't know if you've got any more questions for Alex.
No, that was it from myself as well. I just wanted to say to everyone, we've got the Facebook page, which will be in the description, and all of our Twitters will be down below as well. So again, cheers for joining us, Alex.
No, thanks very much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, anytime you need me, just hit me up.
Perfect. Thank you very much, mate. I appreciate your time, mate.
See you later.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Take care.